Joining me now, my friend Drew Holden. He's a writer. He's one of the best out there at holding these scumbags in this country accountable for things they've said, horrible things they've said in the past. Drew, first and foremost, before we get to DeSantis and Philly and everything else, I actually think it's awful for a nation, for cities to descend into hellholes like they are right now. I know a lot of people are anti-city. I like the country and the city. But I think it's just awful what's happened here. 500 murders already, over 500 murders in Philadelphia. Dude, that sounds like Juarez. That sounds like Kandahar. That's in the United States of America, man. That's a disgrace.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm biased. I live in a city, and here in DC, we've recently crossed the 200 murder threshold. I think it's the earliest that's happened since 1990, right at the height of the crack epidemic. But yeah, I mean, just more broadly, the fact that American cities from coast to coast have been overwhelmed by surges of murder bears horribly on the well-being and standing of this country.
Drew, I'm sure you know the answer to this question. Why is there simply no coverage of it? I mean, we're going to get to Waukesha in a second. I'm not even talking about that. But honestly, in a major American city, D.C., over 200 murders, 500 in Philly. San Francisco's a disaster. They're up over 100% in Portland. This is a pandemic. I hate to use that word, but it's a big deal. Yeah. There's no media coverage.
No, there's none. And Jesse, I mean, it's interesting, too, when you think back about how we did actually see a little bit of coverage in terms of spiking murders under President Trump, because they had somebody they could blame.
Oh, of course.
Right? As long as he was in office, we could point to whatever conditions we wanted to and say, aha, this must be Trump's fault that in all of these cities that didn't vote for him, there is spiraling crime surges. But now we've run out of those options, right? In most of these places, you've got cities that, I mean, like Chicago, I think has had a Democratic mayor for 60 years? I mean, a lot of these cities and states, it's the same thing. All the way down, any systemic force you want to look at, what's driving these are failed liberal policies. And that's not a convenient narrative if what you've been saying all along is that Democrats have made inroads in terms of addressing crime and making things safer and generating more equity and all these other great and wonderful things that supposedly Democratic policies are doing. There's really no way to cover this one up. I mean, it's a failure, and it's about as raw a failure, I think, as we probably have right now in American policymaking.
Drew, I'm going to play a clip for you. I'm sure you've seen it. This is Ron DeSantis talking about Waukesha.
Is that how it works? The SUVs, they just drive by themselves? This just kind of happened? And they say, oh, this was a big accident. You never actually hear the discussion about who committed this, what was the motivation. This guy was a career criminal, let out on, didn't really have any bail, basically, should not have even been on the street, had clear anti-white animus. And this was an intentional act. And it seems like, for corporate press, they're more apt to characterize a parent who goes to a school board meeting to protest bad policies as a domestic terrorist than somebody who intentionally rams an SUV into a crowd of innocent people. So you have at least 6 have died. You have many more that have been injured. I know many people are in the hospital. And so let's just be clear. This was not a car just driving in. This was an attack by a felon who did that, who should not have been on the street. Let's just be clear. They are not wanting to cover this Wisconsin thing for what it is. They are not wanting the facts to come out the way they are because the facts do not support their narrative. And it's all about pursuing partisan narratives.
Drew, I have grown to view the press much more nefariously than I have in the past. I don't know, maybe I'm getting old and bitter and cynical, but I was always that guy. I mean, when Trump would say enemy of the people, I kind of cringed a little bit. That's probably too far. Drew, honestly, maybe you're going to call me a nutball, and that's fine. You're welcome to. We're friends. I do think they are. I think they are an insurgent, hostile force on this nation. We just had a black nationalist mow down 60 white people on purpose, and they forgot about it in about 15 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, as one of the diminishing few who are still manning the ramparts that the press are mistaken rather than malicious. It's getting tough. It's getting tough to hold that line, right? I mean, when you look at something like this. And I think the reason it's so jarring and so stunning isn't just the absence of coverage, right? That's bad enough. But then when you compare it to what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse, right? Within 2 days, the New York Times had dedicated 4 different reporters to write up a detailed 31 or 32 paragraph piece about his social media activity. and about how it was problematic that he had praised police officers, right? That's what we're saying is worth the time of the paper of record for the United States. That's what it was when the bad guy, maybe, perhaps, at least in their telling, fit a certain narrative. And then you've got an incident that is twice as deadly, where far more people are injured and wounded, where we don't have any answers coming out of it. And yet, for some reason, there is no attempt to pursue any of this. There's not even a good faith attempt to ask a couple of questions. It really has completely disappeared from mainstream coverage. And it's impossible to say that that's happening in good faith when you have a parallel example where the opposite happened that was so recent.
Okay, Drew, then what's the reason from a more reasonable person? Because when I look at it, I see it very plainly, but it doesn't mean I'm right. I look at that and I think the American media is really okay with a bunch of white people getting mowed down in Waukesha. Not that they're cheering for it, but they're really not bothered by it in the very least. That's what I see.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, I think the thing that I cling to, and sometimes I really do wonder if I might be a little bit delusional to continue to believe this, given some of the evidence to the contrary. But to me, I think it's really about blind spots, right? I think that when these sorts of things happen, yeah, they're bad, but they're far away. And I think it's easy for people who maybe at the end of the day don't actually care all that much about anyone to be able to look at something like this and let it go by the wayside. And the real animus to me is on the other side, when they're using their investigative powers, when they're using the powers of the newspaper to push and drive a narrative. That to me feels even more malicious. Whereas in this, it's like, yeah, whatever. It's violence, it's crime, it happened. I mean, I think we've seen, particularly over the last couple of years, that the media is increasingly comfortable not talking about crime, right? I think these two things in a way are interestingly connected, because at the end of the day, if it doesn't really serve a compelling narrative, I think it just gets discarded. It's just that some instances of crime, at least in the minds of the editors and the folks kicking around the newsroom, are a lot more effective at telling a story that they want to tell.
Hey, thanks so much for watching The First on YouTube. If you liked what you saw, go ahead and like and subscribe. You heard me. Like it, subscribe. You'll get a lot more of it and a lot more of me.